kicked out and robbed by my family. I went to my ex's house as my last hope. His new wife opened the door. Inside, the stepson who I raised as my own was on his knees, cleaning the floor. "Faster, you useless burden!" she screamed. My despair turned into fury, and what I did next made that woman regret the day she was born. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Helena Martinez, and at 65 years old, I learned that blood doesn't always mean family. I'm sitting here in a coffee shop, the only warm place I could find, trying to make sense of how my own son could look me in the eye and steal everything I had worked for my entire life. It started 3 months ago with a phone call that should have filled me with joy. "Mom, we need to talk about organizing the family documents," David said, his voice unusually serious. "Vanessa thinks it would be smart to get everything in order, for tax purposes." I should have paid attention to how he said Vanessa thinks. My daughter-in-law had always been the one making decisions in their marriage, but I'd learned to keep my mouth shut. Happy wife, happy life, as they say. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, stirring my afternoon tea. "What do you need me to do?" "Just come over this weekend." Vanessa found a financial advisor who specializes in family estates. He'll explain everything. The way he said it, so casual, so caring, I actually felt grateful. Here was my son, thinking about my future, making sure I was taken care of. After losing my husband Miguel 15 years ago, David was all I had left. Well, him and the memories of a boy I'd loved like my own, but that's another story. Saturday morning, I dressed in my best navy dress and drove to their suburban home, the house I'd helped them buy with the down payment from Miguel's life insurance. The irony wasn't lost on me later. Vanessa greeted me at the door with her perfect smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. She was always put together, always calculating. "Helena, come in. Mr. Davidson is already here." Mr. Davidson turned out to be a young man in an expensive suit who spoke in terms I didn't fully understand. Trust funds, asset transfers, tax optimization. The papers were spread across David's dining table like a financial maze. "Mrs. Martinez," he explained, "your son and daughter-in-law want to ensure your assets are protected. By transferring everything into a family trust, you'll avoid significant tax burdens." I looked at David, sitting across from me with that earnest expression I'd seen since he was a boy asking for permission to stay up late. "Is this really necessary?" "Mom, it's the smart thing to do," he said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Everything stays in the family. You'll still have access to everything you need." Vanessa nodded enthusiastically. "Think of it as insurance, Helena. God forbid anything happens to you. But this way, there won't be any legal complications." The way she said "God forbid" made my skin crawl, but I pushed the feeling aside. These were my children, or at least, this was my son and the woman he loved. They wouldn't hurt me. I signed papers for 2 hours, page after page, with Mr. Davidson pointing to signature lines and explaining clauses I didn't understand. David kept reassuring me. Vanessa brought me coffee and smiled that perfect smile. "Just a few more, Mom," David said when I started feeling overwhelmed. "We're almost done." When it was over, Mr. Davidson packed up his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Congratulations," he told all of us. "Your family estate is now properly structured." I went home that day feeling lighter somehow, like I'd done something responsible. Something Miguel would have been proud of. The first sign something was wrong came 2 weeks later when I tried to pay my property taxes. My bank account was frozen. I called the bank, certain it was some kind of mistake. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Martinez," the representative said after putting me on hold for 20 minutes. "The account shows a legal hold due to asset transfer. You'll need to contact the trust administrator." Trust administrator. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I called David immediately. "Oh, Mom, don't worry about that," he said, his voice distracted. "I'll take care of the property taxes. That's the whole point of the trust, remember? To make things easier for you. But it didn't feel easier. It felt like I was disappearing. Over the next month, more accounts became inaccessible. My savings, my retirement fund, even the small investment account Miguel had left me. Every time I called David, he had an explanation that sounded reasonable but felt wrong. The trust needs time to process everything, Mom. It's temporary. Vanessa's handling the financial transition. She's better with numbers than I am. Don't you trust us? That last question haunted me. Of course I trusted them. They were family. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was watering the geraniums on my front porch when David's car pulled into my driveway. He wasn't alone. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat, and behind them was a moving truck. My heart started racing before my mind could catch up. David, what's going on? He couldn't look me in the eye as he walked up my front steps. Mom, we need to talk. About what? Why is there a moving truck in my driveway? Vanessa got out of the car then, carrying a folder thick with documents. Her smile was gone, replaced by something cold and businesslike. Helena, she said, my name sounding sharp in her mouth. We've found a lovely assisted living facility. It's time. Time for what? I felt like I was drowning, like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. David finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke my heart. Guilt, yes, but also determination. Mom, you're getting older. This house is too much for you. The trust has arranged for your care. My care? I laughed, but it came out strangled. I don't need care. I'm perfectly fine. Vanessa opened her folder, pulling out papers with an efficiency that suggested she'd been planning this for a long time. The trust documents you signed give us power of attorney for health and financial decisions. We've determined that supervised care is in your best interest. The words hit me like physical blows. Supervised care, power of attorney, best interest. I didn't sign anything about assisted living, I said, my voice getting stronger with panic. I would never agree to that. Page 47, Section C, Vanessa said without emotion. Guardian authorization for residential placement when deemed necessary by the trust administrators. She might as well have been speaking a foreign language, but David translated it for me with his silence. They were taking my home. They were taking everything. You can't do this, I whispered, looking at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. This is my home. Miguel and I built this life together. Mom, David said, and his voice cracked just a little. You'll be taken care of. The facility is really nice. You'll make friends. I don't want friends. I want my home. I want my life. But the moving men were already getting out of the truck, and Vanessa was directing them toward my front door like she owned the place. Which I was beginning to realize she did. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I watched strangers pack up 40 years of memories into cardboard boxes, while my son avoided my eyes and his wife supervised with the clipboard efficiency of a hostile takeover. Where are my photo albums going? I asked, when I saw them loading the box containing pictures of David's childhood, of Miguel and me, of all our family vacations. Storage, Vanessa said without looking up from her checklist. The facility has limited space for personal items. Those are my memories, and they'll be safe in storage until you're ready for them. But we both knew I would never be ready for them, because I would never be allowed to have them. As the truck pulled away with my entire life inside it, David handed me a small suitcase. I packed some clothes for you, Mom. Essentials. 65 years of life reduced to essentials that fit in one small bag. The assisted living facility was exactly as nice as David had promised, and exactly as soul-crushing as I'd feared. Clean hallways, friendly staff, activities designed to keep elderly minds busy. A place where people went to wait. But I only stayed one night. The next morning, while the staff was busy with breakfast service, I walked out the front door with my small suitcase and started down the street. I had nowhere to go, no money to my name, and no family left to call. That's when the memory hit me. A memory I'd buried for 15 years, of a house across town where I'd once been happy, where I'd once been needed, where a little boy had called me Mom even though I'd never given birth to him. I started walking toward that memory, not knowing what I'd find there, not knowing if I'd even be welcome. All I knew was that I had nothing left to lose. My feet carried me through neighborhoods I barely recognized, past coffee shops and grocery stores where I used to shop when I had money to spend. With each step, my heart beat a little faster, not from the exertion, but from the growing certainty that I was walking towards something important, something that might save me, or destroy what little hope I had left. The address came to me like muscle memory, even though I hadn't been there in 15 years. 1215 Maple Street. I could have found it in my sleep, could have drawn you a map of every crack in the sidewalk leading up to that blue house with white shutters. As I walked, my suitcase growing heavier with each block, I let myself remember what I'd spent years trying to forget. Miguel had been gone for 6 months when I met Ricardo at the grocery store. I was standing in the cereal aisle, staring at boxes of Lucky Charms and wondering why they even made family-size packages anymore, when this man with kind eyes and graying temples asked if I was all right. "You look like someone who's lost," he said, and his voice was so gentle that I almost started crying right there between the Cheerios and the Frosted Flakes. "I think I am," I admitted, which was more honesty than I'd given anyone in months. That's how it started. With truth in a grocery store aisle and a man who didn't run away from a widow's grief. Ricardo Molina was 48 then, 3 years younger than me, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work and a smile that made my chest feel less hollow. He was a carpenter, divorced, trying to raise his 7-year-old son alone after his ex-wife died in a car accident. "Lucas is having a hard time," he told me on our 3rd coffee date, stirring sugar into his cup with nervous fingers. "He barely talks anymore. Won't eat dinner unless I sit right next to him. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." I thought about David, how he'd been after his father died, how he'd crawled into my bed every night for 3 months, how he'd stopped laughing at cartoons, how he'd asked me every morning if I was going to die too. "You're not doing anything wrong," I said. "He's scared. When someone that important disappears from your life, the whole world feels dangerous." Ricardo looked at me like I'd just solved some impossible puzzle. "Would you like to meet him? Maybe you could help me understand him better." I should have said no. I was still raw from losing Miguel, still figuring out how to be Helena instead of Helena and Miguel. But something about the way Ricardo talked about his son reminded me of how lost I'd felt trying to navigate David's grief alone. Lucas was smaller than I'd expected, all knees and elbows and dark hair that fell into eyes that looked too old for his face. He hid behind his father when Ricardo introduced us, peeking out like a curious animal. "Hi, Lucas," I said, crouching down to his level. "Your dad tells me you like dinosaurs." He nodded without speaking, then disappeared into his room. "See?" Ricardo said, running his hands through his hair. He used to talk my ear off about pterodactyls and velociraptors. Now I can barely get him to say good morning, but I'd seen something in Lucas's eyes, a spark of interest when I mentioned dinosaurs. "Give me 5 minutes with him," I said. I found Lucas in his bedroom, surrounded by plastic dinosaurs arranged in elaborate battle scenes. He looked up when I knocked on his door frame, but didn't tell me to go away. "Wow," I said, sitting cross-legged on his carpet. "This is quite a war you've got going here." "The T-Rex is winning," he said quietly. "T-Rex usually does. They're pretty scary." Lucas picked up a small triceratops, turning it over in his hands. "My mom used to play dinosaurs with me. She was always the plant eaters because she said they were nicer." My heart clenched. "What happened to her?" "She went to heaven in a car crash." His voice was matter of fact, the way children talk about things too big for them to understand. "Daddy says she can see me, but I can't see her." I thought about Miguel, about all the nights I'd talked to his empty pillow, about how David had asked me why Daddy couldn't just come back for Christmas. "That's the hardest part," I said carefully. "Missing someone who can't miss you back." Lucas looked up at me with those 2 old eyes. "Do you miss someone?" "Yes, my husband. He died too, but not in a car crash. His heart just got too tired." We sat there for a moment, 2 people who understood loss in the way that only people who've lived it can understand it. "Want to help me set up a dinosaur rescue mission?" I asked. That's how it began. With dinosaurs and shared grief, and a little boy who desperately needed a mother figure, even if he couldn't say it out loud. Within 3 months, I was spending more time at Ricardo's house than at my own. Not because Ricardo asked me to, but because Lucas did, in the wordless way that children ask for things they need. He started talking again first. Little comments about school, about the kids in his class, about whether I thought velociraptors could really run 30 miles per hour. Then he started eating dinner without being coaxed, started sleeping through the night, started laughing at silly jokes. "You're magic," Ricardo told me one evening as we watched Lucas chase fireflies in the backyard. I'd forgotten he could be this happy. "I'm not magic," I said. "I'm just someone who remembers what it feels like to be 7 and scared." But maybe I was a little magic, because Lucas started calling me Mom. Not right away, and not officially. It started as an accident, a slip of the tongue when he was excited about a new book we were reading together. "Mom, look at this picture of a stegosaurus." Then he'd catch himself, look embarrassed, mumble, "I mean Helena." "It's okay," I told him after the 3rd time it happened. "You can call me whatever feels right." "What if I called you Mom and Helena? Would that be okay?" I looked at this sweet boy who'd somehow healed parts of my heart I didn't know were broken, who made me remember what it felt like to be needed for something other than grief management. "That would be perfect," I said. Ricardo and I never officially lived together, but I might as well have. I had my own key, my own drawer in his dresser, my own spot at their dinner table. I packed Lucas's lunches, helped with homework, read bedtime stories, attended parent-teacher conferences. For 5 years, I was the mother Lucas needed, and he was the child who made me feel whole again. David was grown by then, busy with college and his own life. But Lucas needed me in the immediate, consuming way that only children can need someone. I taught him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike without training wheels, to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. I kissed scraped knees, helped with science projects, cheered at Little League games. I was there for his first day of middle school, his first heartbreak, his first A on a math test he'd studied weeks for. Ricardo and I talked about marriage occasionally, but we never seemed to need it. We had something that worked, something comfortable and easy and full of love. We were a family without the paperwork. Until we weren't. The cracks started small. Arguments about money, about Lucas's discipline, about whose family we'd visit for holidays. Ricardo thought I was too soft with Lucas, too willing to let him quit activities when they got difficult. I thought Ricardo was too hard, too focused on making Lucas tough instead of helping him feel safe. "He needs to learn that life isn't always going to be easy," Ricardo said after I'd convinced him to let Lucas quit soccer when the coach turned out to be a screaming tyrant. "He's 12, I replied. "He has plenty of time to learn that life is hard. Right now he needs to learn that someone will protect him when it is." These weren't fights exactly, but they were fractures. Little disagreements that built up like sediment, changing the landscape of our relationship so gradually that we didn't notice until it was too late. The end came during Lucas's 8th grade graduation. I was sitting in the auditorium, watching him walk across the stage in his blue cap and gown, feeling so proud I thought my heart might burst. That's when Ricardo leaned over and said the words that destroyed everything. "We need to talk about boundaries, Helena. You're not his real mother." The words hit me like a slap. Not his real mother. After 5 years of Band-Aids and bedtime stories, and being the person Lucas called when he had nightmares. "What's that supposed to mean?" I whispered, trying not to make a scene in front of all the other families celebrating their children. "It means you can't make decisions about his life like you're his parent. You're not his parent." I stared at this man I'd loved, this man whose child I'd helped raise, and realized he'd never seen me the way I'd seen myself. I was the girlfriend who helped out, not the mother who belonged. The fight lasted 3 weeks. Not screaming matches, but cold, careful conversations where we tried to negotiate the terms of a relationship that had already ended. Ricardo wanted me to step back, to be supportive, but not central. I wanted him to admit that I'd earned the right to be Lucas's mother in every way that mattered. Neither of us would budge. "Maybe we need some time apart," Ricardo said finally, "to figure out what this is supposed to look like." "Maybe we do," I agreed, knowing that some kinds of time apart don't end with coming back together. The hardest part was saying goodbye to Lucas. I waited until he was at school, then packed up my things from Ricardo's house while my heart broke with every item I put in boxes. My coffee mug from the kitchen cabinet, my books from the nightstand, the picture Lucas had drawn of our family, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. I left Ricardo a letter explaining why I couldn't do things his way, why I couldn't love Lucas halfway, why being not his real mother was worse than not being in his life at all. But I never said goodbye to Lucas directly. I couldn't. How do you explain to a 13-year-old boy that the woman who's been his mother for 5 years is leaving because his father thinks she loves him too much? I just disappeared, the same way his birth mother had, except I chose to go. For 15 years, I wondered if he hated me for it. For 15 years, I carried the guilt of abandoning a child who'd already been abandoned once. For 15 years, I forced myself not to drive by their house, not to call, not to check if he was okay. Now, walking toward that blue house with my life packed into one small suitcase, I realized that guilt had been eating me alive all these years. The what-ifs had become their own kind of prison. What if Lucas had needed me and I wasn't there? What if he'd gotten hurt and no one kissed it better? What if he'd graduated high school and wondered why the woman who'd helped him with algebra homework for 3 years didn't care enough to be there? What if he'd simply forgotten me altogether? As I turned onto Maple Street, my legs shaking with exhaustion and emotion, I tried to prepare myself for any possibility. Ricardo might slam the door in my face. Lucas might not even remember me. They might have moved away years ago. But as the blue house came into view, still blue, still familiar, still the place where I'd been happiest, I realized that I didn't care what I might find there. I just needed to know that the boy I'd loved like my own had grown up safe and loved, even if it was by someone else, even if he'd forgotten me completely, even if showing up at his door was the most selfish thing I'd ever done. Standing in front of that blue house after 15 years felt like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up from. The white shutters were faded now, and the front garden that Ricardo had always kept so neat was overgrown with weeds. But it was still the same house where I'd been happy, where I'd felt like I belonged. My hands shook as I reached for the doorbell. What was I going to say? Hello? I'm the woman who abandoned your family 15 years ago, and now I need help? Hi. Remember me? The one who disappeared without saying goodbye to your son. I pressed the button and heard the familiar chime echo inside. Footsteps approached, lighter than Ricardo's had ever been, clicking on what sounded like high heels. The door opened to reveal a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, probably mid-40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that looked like she was ready for a photo shoot. Her clothes were expensive, the kind of designer outfit that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Yes? She said, looking me up and down with obvious distaste. Her eyes lingered on my worn coat, my small suitcase, the way I was clearly a woman with nowhere else to go. I'm sorry to bother you, I began, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. I'm looking for Ricardo Molina. Does he still live here? Her expression shifted from annoyance to something colder. Who's asking? My name is Helena Martinez. I used to be. I was friends with Ricardo, and his son Lucas. The woman's eyes narrowed. Friends, she repeated, like the word tasted bitter in her mouth. What kind of friends? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. This wasn't how I'd imagined this conversation going. We were close. Years ago. I helped raise Lucas when he was younger. Oh, she said, and suddenly her whole demeanor changed. A cruel smile spread across her face. You're the one who ran away, Helena. Lucas used to cry for you, you know, for months after you left. The words hit me like a physical blow. Lucas had cried for me, the boy I'd loved and left, the child I'd convinced myself would be better off without me, had cried when I disappeared from his life. I need to see Ricardo, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is he here? The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Ricardo's been dead for 2 years, sweetie. Heart attack. Very sudden. Very convenient. Dead. The word echoed in my head like a bell tolling. Ricardo was dead, and I'd never gotten the chance to apologize, to explain, to tell him that leaving had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. You weren't here. You ran away and never looked back." She leaned against the doorframe, studying me like I was an interesting insect. "I'm Carla, by the way, Ricardo's widow. Well, his last wife anyway. Last wife." The words stung more than they should have. Of course Ricardo had remarried. Of course he'd found someone else. Someone who wouldn't disappear when things got complicated. "Is Lucas here?" I asked. "I'd like to see him, if that's possible." Carla's smile grew wider, more predatory. "Oh, Lucas is here. He's always here. Where else would he be?" Before I could ask what she meant, a sound from inside the house made my blood freeze. It was a voice, raised in anger, echoing through the rooms I'd once known so well. I said faster, "You worthless burden. Do I have to do everything myself?" It was Carla's voice, but harsher, crueler than the artificially sweet tone she'd been using with me. And underneath it, I heard something that made my heart stop. "Sorry, I'm sorry. I'll finish it. Lucas." That was Lucas's voice, older and deeper than the 13-year-old boy I'd left behind, but unmistakably him. And he was apologizing, the way I'd heard children apologize when they were afraid. I pushed past Carla without asking permission, following the sound of voices toward the kitchen. What I saw there would haunt me for the rest of my life. Lucas was on his hands and knees on the kitchen floor, scrubbing tiles with a brush and bucket of soapy water. But this wasn't the Lucas I remembered. This was a young man, maybe 28 years old now, but he looked older, worn down by something I couldn't name. His clothes were old and ill-fitting, his hair too long and unkempt, his shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. And standing over him, arms crossed and expression disgusted, was Carla. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing to an area of floor that looked perfectly clean to me. "And when you're done with that, the toilets need scrubbing. The guest bathroom is disgusting." Lucas looked up to respond, and that's when our eyes met. I watched 15 years collapse in his face. The little boy I'd loved, the teenager I'd abandoned, the man he'd become all flickered across his features in the space of a heartbeat. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Helena?" he whispered finally, his voice breaking on my name. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This beautiful, kind boy who used to make me pancakes on Saturday mornings was on his knees, being treated like a servant in his own father's house. "What are you doing here?" Carla demanded, but I barely heard her. All I could see was Lucas, still kneeling on the floor, looking at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Lucas," I said, finding my voice. "What's happening here?" He started to answer, but Carla cut him off. "Nothing that's any of your business. You lost the right to ask questions about this family when you abandoned them. Abandoned them." The word hung in the air between us like an accusation. And maybe it was true. Maybe I had abandoned them. But looking at Lucas now, seeing the fear in his eyes, the way he flinched when Carla raised her voice, I knew that whatever I'd done 15 years ago was nothing compared to what was happening to him now. "Lucas, stand up," I said firmly. "Please." He looked at Carla, asking permission with his eyes. The fact that he needed permission broke my heart all over again. "He's busy," Carla said. "He has chores to finish." Unlike some people, Lucas understands the value of hard work. "This isn't hard work," I said, my voice getting stronger with anger. "This is abuse." Carla laughed. "Abuse? Lucas has a roof over his head, food to eat, clothes on his back. All he has to do is earn his keep. Some of us believe in personal responsibility." I looked around the kitchen, really looked this time. The counters were spotless, the appliances gleaming, the floor clean enough to eat off of. This wasn't about cleaning. This was about power, about keeping Lucas down, about making him feel worthless. "How long has this been going on?" I asked Lucas directly, ignoring Carla completely. "Since Dad died," he said quietly, still not standing up. "It's okay, Helena. Really. I don't mind helping out." Helping out. As if scrubbing floors on his hands and knees was just lending a hand around the house. "Where's your room?" I asked, dreading the answer. Lucas glanced at Carla again. That same look of asking permission. In the basement. It's fine. It's warm down there. The basement. They had him living in the basement like he was some kind of unwanted relative, some burden to be hidden away. This is his father's house, I said to Carla, my voice rising. Ricardo left this house to Lucas. Carla's smile turned nasty. Actually, Ricardo left this house to his wife. That would be me. Lucas is welcome to stay as long as he contributes to the household. Contributes to the household. I was beginning to understand exactly what that meant. What about Ricardo's life insurance? His savings? Lucas should have inherited something. Medical bills, Carla said with a shrug. Ricardo was sick for months before he died. Very expensive. There wasn't much left after the hospital took their cut. She was lying. I could see it in the way her eyes shifted, in the casual cruelty of her smile. Ricardo had been a successful carpenter with a good reputation. He would have had savings, investments, something to leave his son. Lucas, I said, kneeling down beside him on the floor. Look at me. He turned his head, and I saw something that made my chest tight with rage. There was a fading bruise on his jaw, yellow-green around the edges like it was a week or two old. Who did this to you? I asked, reaching out to touch his face. He pulled back instinctively. I fell, he said quickly. I'm clumsy sometimes. Fell. The same lie children tell when they're protecting someone who hurts them. I stood up slowly, my joints aching from the long walk, but my mind crystal clear for the first time in months. Everything else, David's betrayal, losing my house, being thrown out with nothing, all of that faded into background noise. This was what mattered. This boy I'd loved. Now a man being systematically destroyed by a woman who saw him as nothing more than free labor. Lucas, I said firmly, get up. We're leaving. He's not going anywhere, Carla said, stepping between us. This is his home. I'm his legal guardian. Legal guardian of a 28-year-old man. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. He's an adult, I said. You can't be the guardian of an adult. Actually, I can. Lucas has some. Developmental issues. Anxiety, depression, difficulty making decisions. The court agreed that he needs supervision. I looked at Lucas, seeing the shame in his eyes, and understood. Carla had convinced a court that the trauma of losing his father, the natural grief and confusion that comes with loss, was evidence that Lucas couldn't take care of himself. And maybe, living under her roof, being told every day that he was worthless, being isolated from anyone who might challenge her authority, maybe Lucas had started to believe it too. Is that true? I asked him gently. Do you think you need a guardian? He opened his mouth to answer, but Carla cut him off again. What Lucas thinks doesn't matter. The court decides what's best for him. That's when I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't just cruelty. This was systematic, calculated abuse designed to keep Lucas dependent, isolated, and under Carla's control. And it was about to end. Lucas, I said, my voice calm but carrying a strength I'd forgotten I had. Do you remember when you were 8 and you told me you wanted to run away because the kids at school were being mean to you? He nodded, a tiny smile flickering across his face. And do you remember what I told you? You said sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. That's right. So I'm asking you now, Lucas. Do you want help? He looked at Carla, then at the bucket of soapy water, then at me. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, but it was the strongest thing I'd heard all day. Yes, he said. Please. I want help. Carla's face went white with rage. You can't just waltz back in here after 15 years and destroy this family. Lucas is fine. He's safe. He's cared for. I looked at this woman who had turned my boy into a slave, who had stolen his inheritance and his dignity, who had convinced him he was worthless. Lady, I said, and my voice was ice cold, you have no idea who you're dealing with. But you're about to find out. The moment Lucas said he wanted help, something shifted inside me. The scared, broken woman who had arrived at this door disappeared, replaced by someone I'd almost forgotten existed, the woman who had fought for her son when he was bullied at school, The woman who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table after Miguel died. The woman who had loved this boy enough to walk away when she thought it was best for him. I was done being a victim. "Lucas, go pack a bag," I said, not taking my eyes off Carla. "We're leaving. Now." "He's not going anywhere," Carla snarled, stepping closer to me. "You can't just show up here and steal him away. I'll call the police." "Go ahead and call them," I said calmly. "I'd love to explain to a police officer why a 28-year-old man is living in a basement and scrubbing floors like a servant." Lucas hadn't moved. He was still kneeling on the floor, looking between us like he was watching a tennis match that would determine his fate. "Lucas," I said, gentler now, "you don't have to be afraid anymore. Stand up." "Don't you dare," Carla hissed. "Lucas, stay where you are. You know what happens when you don't listen to me." The threat in her voice was unmistakable, and I saw Lucas flinch. That's when the last of my self-control snapped. "What happens, Carla?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "Tell me what happens when Lucas doesn't obey you." She realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. The mask had slipped and we all knew it. "I don't know what you're implying," she said, trying to regain her composure. "Lucas is treated very well here. He has everything he needs." "Everything he needs?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Like a bedroom in the basement? Like bruises on his face? Like being called worthless? Lucas finally stood up, the bucket of dirty water forgotten at his feet. "Helena, you don't understand. After Dad died, Carla took care of everything. The hospital bills, the funeral, all of it. I owe her." "You owe her?" I turned to look at him, this sweet boy who had been broken down so thoroughly that he believed he deserved this treatment. "Lucas, you don't owe anyone for basic human decency. I'm not smart like Dad was," he said, and the defeat in his voice made my heart ache. "I can't handle money or legal stuff. Carla says I'd lose everything if I tried to manage it myself." "What legal stuff? What money?" Carla stepped forward quickly. "That's private family business." "He is my family," I said, the words coming out fiercer than I'd intended. "He's been my family since he was 7 years old." "You left him," Carla shot back. "You walked away and never looked back. Some family." She was right, and the truth of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I had left him. When things got complicated with Ricardo, when I couldn't figure out how to love Lucas without losing myself in the process, I had taken the coward's way out and disappeared. But I was here now. "You're right," I said, and both Carla and Lucas looked surprised. "I did leave. I made a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it every day for 15 years. But I'm not leaving now. Not ever again." I turned to Lucas, really looking at him for the first time since I'd arrived. Under the worn clothes and unkempt hair, under the defeat and fear, I could still see traces of the bright, curious boy who used to help me make pancakes on Saturday mornings. "Lucas, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" He nodded slowly, and I saw something flicker in his eyes that might have been hope. "Good. Now tell me about your father's will. What exactly did Carla inherit?" "Everything," Carla said before Lucas could answer. "The house, the business, the bank accounts, all of it." "That doesn't sound right," I said, remembering the Ricardo I'd known. He loved Lucas more than anything. He wouldn't have left him with nothing. "Well, he did," Carla said with a shrug. "Maybe that tells you something about how he felt about Lucas's ability to handle responsibility." I watched Lucas's face crumple at her words, and something inside me roared to life. This woman had been systematically destroying his self-worth, convincing him that his own father hadn't trusted him, that he was too incompetent to deserve an inheritance. "Where's the will?" I asked. "Safely stored away." "Not that it's any of your business." "Lucas, did you see the will? Did anyone read it to you?" He shook his head. "Carla handled everything. She said it was too complicated for me to understand." Of course she did. I was beginning to see the whole picture now. A grieving young man, overwhelmed by his father's sudden death, relying on his stepmother to navigate the legal complexities. A stepmother who saw an opportunity and took it. "I want to see that will," I said. Carla laughed. And I want $1 million. We don't always get what we want, do we? Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I think we might. Lucas, as Ricardo's son, you have the right to see any legal documents that affect your inheritance. If Carla won't show them to you, we can get a court order. You can't afford a lawyer, Carla said. But I heard uncertainty in her voice for the first time. She was wrong about that. Before I'd married Miguel, before I'd become a housewife and mother, I'd worked as a paralegal for 15 years. I knew my way around the legal system, and more importantly, I knew when someone was hiding something. I don't need to afford one, I said. Probate records are public. I can look up Ricardo's will myself. The color drained from Carla's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Tell you what, let's find out. Lucas, get your coat. We're going to the courthouse. Stop, Carla said. And for the first time since I'd arrived, she sounded desperate. Fine. You want to see the will? I'll show you the will. She disappeared upstairs, leaving Lucas and me alone in the kitchen. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything was going to be okay, but I could see how fragile he was, how years of abuse had taught him not to trust good things. I'm scared, he said quietly, and his honesty broke my heart. I know you are, but Lucas, you're not a little boy anymore. You're a grown man and you have rights. You don't have to live like this. What if she's right? What if I really can't take care of myself? I looked at this gentle soul who had been convinced he was worthless and saw the truth that Carla had been hiding. Lucas wasn't incompetent. He was traumatized. There's a difference. Do you remember? I said softly. When you were 10 and you saved up your allowance for 3 months to buy your dad a new hammer for Father's Day? He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. And you did all that research to find the best one? And you comparison shopped at 4 different stores to get the best price? Dad loved that hammer, he said, and his voice was stronger. That's right. And do you remember when you were 12 and you taught yourself guitar so you could play Happy Birthday for Me? You cried, he said, and now he was really smiling. I cried because I was so proud of you. Lucas, smart isn't just about handling money or understanding legal documents. Smart is about being kind and thoughtful and determined. And you've always been the smartest person I know in all the ways that matter. We heard Carla's footsteps on the stairs, and Lucas's expression grew guarded again. She appeared with a folder in her hands, but her demeanor had changed. She looked nervous now, like someone who had been caught in a lie and was trying to figure out how to get out of it. Here, she said, thrusting the folder at me. The will. See for yourself. I opened the folder and immediately knew something was wrong. There were too many pages, too many different documents, too many things that looked like they'd been signed at different times. This is a lot of paperwork for a simple will, I said, scanning the first page. Ricardo's affairs were complicated, Carla said quickly. There were business assets, insurance policies, investment accounts. I kept reading, using the skills I'd learned during my paralegal years to parse the legal language. What I found made my blood boil. The will was real. Ricardo had indeed left everything to Carla, but buried in the middle of the stack of papers was something else. An earlier will, dated 6 months before Ricardo's death. A will that left everything to Lucas, with Carla receiving only a small monthly stipend. Lucas, I said, holding up the earlier document, look at this. He took the paper with trembling hands, and I watched his face change as he read it. I don't understand, he said. This says Dad left me the house, the business, everything. That's an old will, Carla said quickly. Your father changed his mind before he died. The newer one is legally binding. Why would he change his mind? I asked, studying the dates on both documents. What happened in those 6 months? He realized Lucas wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility, Carla said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked more closely at the signatures on both wills. I wasn't a handwriting expert, but I'd seen Ricardo's signature hundreds of times when we were together. The signature on the newer will looked different, shakier, like it had been signed by someone who was very sick or very scared. Lucas, I said carefully, was your father sick before he died? I mean, really sick. In the hospital sick? The last 3 months, Lucas said. He had pneumonia, and then his heart got weak. He was in and out of the hospital a lot. 3 months. The newer will was dated just 2 weeks before Ricardo's death, when he would have been at his sickest and most vulnerable. Who was with him when he signed this? I asked Carla. I was, of course. I was his wife. I took care of everything. I bet she did. I was beginning to see exactly how she'd taken care of everything. Lucas, I think your stepmother convinced your father to change his will when he was too sick to think clearly. I think she manipulated a dying man into disinheriting his own son. That's a serious accusation, Carla said, but her voice was shaking. You can't prove any of that. Maybe not, I said, but I know someone who can. Lucas, we're going to contest this will. We're going to get you what your father really wanted you to have. You can't, Carla said desperately. There's no money for lawyers. Lucas can't afford to fight this. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Carla, you've made 2 big mistakes. First, you assumed I was just some helpless old woman with nowhere to go. Second, you forgot that I spent 15 years working in law offices. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling my old boss. He owes me a favor, and he specializes in elder abuse cases. Did you know that coercing someone to change their will while they're mentally incapacitated is a felony? Carla's face went white. You can't prove he was mentally incapacitated. Actually, I can. Lucas, do you have your father's medical records from those last 3 months? He nodded. They're in a box in my room. Carla said I needed to keep them for insurance purposes. Perfect. Those records will show exactly what kind of medication he was on, what his mental state was like, whether he was capable of making major legal decisions. I turned back to Carla, who was looking more panicked by the minute. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm but implacable. You're going to leave this house. Today. And you're going to sign over everything that rightfully belongs to Lucas. Or I'm going to take you to court and expose exactly what kind of person you are. This is extortion, she said weakly. No, I replied. This is justice. There's a difference. Lucas was staring at me like I'd just grown wings. Helena, I don't understand. How do you know all this legal stuff? I took his hand, this boy I'd loved and left and found again. Because before I was your mom, I was someone who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And I never forgot how to do that. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like myself again. The woman who had loved Lucas enough to leave him was gone. The woman who would fight the world to protect him was here to stay. The next hour was the longest and most important of my life. While Lucas went to gather his father's medical records, I sat at the kitchen table with Carla, watching her facade crumble piece by piece. The perfectly put-together woman who had answered the door was gone, replaced by someone desperate and cornered. You don't understand, she said, her voice taking on a whining quality I hadn't heard before. I loved Ricardo. I took care of him when he was dying. I was the one who sat by his hospital bed every night. And you were also the one who convinced him to sign away his son's inheritance when he was too sick to think straight, I replied, spreading the documents across the table. I was studying the wills more carefully now, using the knowledge I'd gained during my years as a paralegal. The differences were even more obvious in good light. The handwriting on the second will was shaky, uncertain. The signature looked like it had been guided by someone else's hand. He was scared Lucas couldn't handle the responsibility, Carla insisted. Ricardo said so himself. He said Lucas was too sensitive, too trusting. He'd lose everything within a year. Funny how he supposedly said that right after you married him, I observed. For the 5 years I knew Ricardo, all he ever talked about was building something to leave his son. He was obsessed with making sure Lucas would be taken care of. People change, she said weakly. Yes, they do. Especially when someone is manipulating them. Lucas appeared in the doorway carrying a cardboard box, and I could see his hands shaking. I found them, he said. All of Dad's hospital records. I gestured for him to sit down beside me. Lucas, I need to ask you some hard questions about your father's last months. Can you do that? He nodded, though I could see the pain in his eyes. Tell me about his mental state. Was he confused? Did he have trouble remembering things? The medication made him foggy, Lucas said slowly. Sometimes he'd forget what day it was, or he'd think I was still 13 years old. The doctors said it was normal with the drugs they were giving him for his heart. I looked at Carla, who had gone very pale. And who was making his medical decisions during this time? I was, Carla said quickly. As his wife, I had medical power of attorney. How convenient, I said. I pulled out one of the medical records and scanned it. Lucas, look at this date. This is 2 days before your father supposedly signed the new will. According to his chart, he was on morphine, Ativan, and 2 different heart medications that are known to cause confusion and disorientation. Lucas stared at the paper, and I watched understanding dawn on his face. Dad wasn't thinking clearly, not even close, I confirmed. A first-year law student could get this will thrown out based on these medical records alone. But the lawyers said it was legal, Carla protested. They witnessed the signature. What lawyers? I asked. I'd like their names. She hesitated just long enough to tell me she was lying. I don't remember their names. It was a while ago. Carla, in most states you need 2 disinterested witnesses for a will to be valid. That means 2 people who don't benefit from the document. Who witnessed Ricardo's signature? 2 nurses from the hospital, she said, but her voice was getting smaller. Nurses who worked for you? Who you might have influenced or paid. It wasn't like that. I was building my case methodically, the way I'd learned during my paralegal years. Every lie she told gave me more ammunition, more proof that this will was fraudulent. Lucas, I said, I want you to think carefully. In those last weeks, did your father ever say anything to you about changing his will? Did he ever mention wanting to leave everything to Carla? Lucas shook his head slowly. No. If anything, he kept talking about how I needed to learn to take care of the business. He said after he was gone, it would be my responsibility to carry on what he'd built. And yet supposedly, just 2 weeks later, he decided you were too incompetent to inherit anything. I told you, he realized Lucas wasn't ready, Carla said, but she sounded like a broken record now. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. This woman had taken everything from Lucas. Not just his inheritance, but his sense of self-worth. She'd convinced him he was worthless, that his own father hadn't trusted him. She'd isolated him, abused him, and stolen his future, and she'd done it all while he was grieving the loss of the only parent he had left. Here's what I think really happened, I said, my voice calm but implacable. I think you married a sick man for his money. I think you waited until he was too weak and confused to resist, and then you forced him to sign a will that cut out his son. I think you found 2 people who owed you favors to witness the signature, and I think you've spent the last 2 years systematically destroying Lucas's spirit so he wouldn't fight back. You can't prove any of that, Carla said, but her voice was shaking. Actually, I can. Lucas, do you remember the name of your father's original lawyer? The one who drew up the first will? Mr. Patterson, Lucas said immediately. Dad used him for years. He drew up the papers when Dad bought the business. I smiled. Perfect. Mr. Patterson will have copies of all communications with your father. He'll be able to testify about Ricardo's mental state and his intentions regarding his estate. I pulled out my phone. And since it's only 3 o'clock, his office should still be open. Wait, Carla said desperately. Wait, please. You don't understand. I'm not a bad person. I needed security. I'd never had anything before I married Ricardo. So you stole it from his son. I didn't steal anything. I took care of Ricardo when he was dying. I sat by his bed. I fed him. I cleaned him when he couldn't do it himself. Doesn't that count for something? I looked at this woman who was finally showing her true colors, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just anger, but pity. Carla, I said gently, if you'd taken care of Ricardo and been kind to his son, you would have had a place in this family forever. Lucas would have shared everything with you. He's that kind of person. Lucas nodded. I would have, he said quietly. If you'd just been nice to me, I would have taken care of you the way Dad would have wanted. Carla's face crumpled. and for a moment I saw the scared, insecure woman underneath all the manipulation and cruelty. But instead, I continued, you chose to be greedy. You chose to abuse a grieving young man instead of loving him. You chose to steal instead of share. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart sink. It was David, my son, the one who had stolen everything from me and thrown me out of my own home. Excuse me, I said to Lucas and Carla. I need to take this. I walked into the living room and answered the call. Mom, where are you? David's voice was sharp with panic. The facility said you left. You can't just disappear like that. I didn't disappear, David. I left. There's a difference. Mom, please be reasonable. Come back to the facility. We can work this out. I looked back toward the kitchen, where Lucas was sitting at the table studying his father's medical records, finally beginning to understand what had been done to him. No, David. I'm not coming back. I'm exactly where I need to be. What's that supposed to mean? Mom, you're scaring me. Good, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in your life, you should be scared, because I'm not your victim anymore. I hung up before he could respond and turned off my phone. David's problems would have to wait. Right now, Lucas needed me. When I returned to the kitchen, Carla was crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use on Lucas, but real, ugly sobs of someone whose world was falling apart. I don't have anywhere to go, she said through her tears. This house is all I have. You should have thought of that before you stole it, I replied, though I said it without cruelty. I sat down beside Lucas and took his hand. What do you want to do? This is your decision to make. He looked at Carla, then at me, then at the papers spread across the table. I want what Dad really wanted me to have, but I also want to do the right thing. That was the Lucas I remembered. Even after everything she'd done to him, his first instinct was still kindness. What would be the right thing? I asked, curious to hear his answer. Dad's will left Carla $500 a month for life. If I get everything back, I'd still honor that. It's what Dad wanted. $500 a month. A safety net, but not a fortune. Enough to live modestly, but not enough to live in luxury at someone else's expense. Carla looked up sharply. $500 a month? That's nothing. I can't live on that. It's more than Lucas has been living on, I pointed out. How much allowance have you been giving him? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Here's my offer, I said to Carla. You sign over the house, the business, and all of Ricardo's assets to Lucas, where they belong. In return, Lucas will honor the original will and pay you $500 a month for the rest of your life. You'll have 1 week to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. And if I refuse? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Then I call Mr. Patterson. We contest the will in court, and I make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you are. You'll get nothing, and you'll face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. Carla sat in silence for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she looked up at Lucas. You'd really pay me $500 a month? Even after everything I've done? Lucas nodded. It's what Dad wanted. I won't go back on his word. But you're not required to let her abuse you anymore, I added firmly. She takes the money and leaves you alone, or the deal is off. Carla wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked almost human. Okay, she said quietly. I'll sign the papers. 3 hours later, we sat in Mr. Patterson's office while he drew up the documents that would restore Lucas's inheritance. The lawyer, a kind-faced man in his 60s, had been appalled to learn what had happened to his old client's son. I never liked that will, he told us as he prepared the paperwork. When Carla brought it to me to probate, something felt wrong about it, but I didn't have grounds to contest it at the time. Well, now you do, I said, watching as Carla signed document after document, legally transferring everything back to its rightful owner. When it was over, Lucas owned his father's house, his carpentry business, and a bank account that had been much larger than Carla had led him to believe. Not wealthy, but comfortable, secure, free. As we left the lawyer's office, Carla walked to her car without saying goodbye. But just before she got in, she turned back to Lucas. "I'm sorry," she said, and for once I believed she meant it. "I was scared and I made bad choices. I know that's not an excuse, but I'm sorry." Lucas nodded. "I forgive you," he said simply, "but I never want to see you again." She drove away, and I watched the last of Lucas's tormentors disappear from his life. We stood on the sidewalk outside the lawyer's office, and I realized that for the first time in 15 years, Lucas was truly free. "What happens now?" he asked, and his voice was different, stronger. Like he was remembering who he used to be before Carla broke him down. I looked at this young man I'd helped raise, this boy I'd loved and lost and found again, and I realized something wonderful. I was home. 6 months later, I woke up in the blue house on Maple Street for the 100th morning in a row, and it still felt like a miracle. The sun was streaming through the kitchen windows as I made coffee, listening to the sounds of Lucas getting ready for work upstairs. He'd taken over his father's carpentry business and was slowly building it back up after years of Carla's neglect. The clients were returning, drawn by the same quality craftsmanship that had made Ricardo's reputation. "Morning, Mom," Lucas said as he came downstairs, and my heart still skipped a beat every time he called me that. "Morning, sweetheart. Coffee's ready." He poured himself a cup and sat at the table, the same table where we'd confronted Carla all those months ago, but now it was covered with business invoices and project sketches instead of legal documents and lies. "Mrs. Henderson wants me to build her a deck," he said, showing me a rough drawing he'd made. "It's a big job. Probably take me 3 weeks." "That's wonderful," I said, settling into the chair beside him. "You're booked solid through Christmas." It was true. Word had spread quickly that Lucas Molina was back in business, and the phone had been ringing constantly. Turns out people had missed Ricardo's son more than they'd realized. Lucas had changed so much in these past months. The defeated, broken young man I'd found scrubbing floors had been replaced by someone confident and capable. He stood straighter now, smiled more, looked people in the eye when he talked to them. "I have something to tell you," he said, and there was something nervous in his voice that made me look up from my coffee. "What is it?" "I've been talking to Dr. Martinez about buying her rental property next door." I knew the house he meant. A small, neat bungalow with a garden that backed up to this one. "That's a good investment," I said carefully, wondering why he seemed nervous about it. "I wasn't thinking of it as an investment exactly." He took a deep breath. "I was thinking you could live there. I mean, if you wanted to. It would be your house, not mine. Your own place, but close enough that we could have dinner together every night if you wanted." My throat tightened with emotion. Even now, after all these months of rebuilding our relationship, Lucas was worried that I might leave again. "Lucas," I said gently, "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to buy me a house to keep me here." "I know," he said quickly, "but you gave up everything for me. Your whole life, your retirement, your own home. I want to give you something back." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Sweetheart, you didn't take anything from me. You gave me back my life." It was true. Living here with Lucas, helping him rebuild his business, being needed and valued and loved, had healed parts of me I'd thought were permanently broken. "But what about your son?" Lucas asked. "David's been calling every week." David, my biological son who had stolen everything from me and then had the nerve to be upset when I chose not to come crawling back. His weekly phone calls had become increasingly desperate as he realized I wasn't coming home. "What about him? Don't you miss him? Don't you want to work things out?" I considered this question carefully. Did I miss David? I missed the little boy he'd been, the child I'd raised and loved, but the man who had looked me in the eye and stolen my life? No, I didn't miss him at all. "David made his choice," I said finally. "He chose his wife's greed over his mother's well-being. I've made my choice too, which is to be where I'm loved and respected and needed, to be with my real family." Lucas smiled, that bright, genuine smile I'd fallen in love with when he was 7 years old. My phone rang then, the landline that David had been using to try to reach me since I'd blocked his number on my cell. "Should I answer it?" Lucas asked. I shook my head. "Let it ring." We sat in comfortable silence while the phone rang and rang, then finally stopped. A moment later, it started ringing again. "He's persistent," Lucas observed. "He's desperate. There's a difference." The answering machine picked up, and David's voice filled the kitchen. "Mom, please pick up. I know you're there. Vanessa and I want to talk to you. We miss you. Please come home." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "He misses you?" "He misses my bank account," I said dryly. "Turns out when you cut off someone's source of free money, they suddenly discover they love you." The machine beeped, and David's voice came through again. "Mom, I'm coming to get you. I've hired a private investigator to find you. You can't hide forever." This time, Lucas looked worried. "Can he force you to come back?" I laughed, surprising myself with how genuinely amused I was. "Lucas, I'm 65 years old, not 6. David can't force me to do anything." But Lucas was still frowning. "What if he makes trouble? What if he tries to cause problems for us?" I thought about this for a moment. David was angry and desperate, which could make him dangerous in his own weak way. But I wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Then we'll deal with it," I said simply. "Together." The phone rang again, but this time I got up and answered it. "David," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Mom, thank God. I've been so worried about you. Where are you? I'll come get you right now. I'm exactly where I want to be. Mom, please be reasonable. You can't just live with strangers. You need family." I looked at Lucas, who was listening to every word with growing anger. "I am with family, David. I'm with someone who actually loves me." "I love you," David protested, and he might have even believed it. "No, you don't. You love what I can give you. There's a difference." I could hear Vanessa in the background, whispering urgently, probably coaching him on what to say next. "Mom, if this is about money, we can work something out. Maybe we were too hasty with the trust arrangement. Too hasty, as if stealing my entire life had been a minor clerical error. David, let me explain something to you. When you forced me to sign those papers, when you threw me into that facility, when you stole everything I'd worked for my entire life, you stopped being my son. You became a stranger who happened to share my DNA. Mom, that's not fair. What's not fair is what you did to me. What's not fair is how you treated me like a burden instead of the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you." Lucas stood up and came to stand beside me, close enough that David could hear him when he spoke. "Mrs. Martinez doesn't want to talk to you anymore," Lucas said, his voice firm. "Stop calling here." "Who is that?" David demanded. "Mom, who are you living with?" "Someone who knows how to love without stealing," I said. "Goodbye, David." I hung up the phone and immediately unplugged it from the wall. "Feel better?" Lucas asked. "Much." We finished our coffee in peaceful silence. Then Lucas left for work with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to be home by 6 for the dinner I'd planned. Alone in the house, I walked through the rooms that had become my home again. The living room where Lucas and I watched old movies together. The kitchen where we cooked side by side every evening. The guest room that had become mine, filled with the few possessions I'd managed to salvage from my old life. This house was smaller than the one David and Vanessa had stolen from me. The furniture was older, the appliances less fancy. But it was filled with something my old house had never had in those final years: genuine love. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, broken and defeated, with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate hope that the boy I'd loved might remember me kindly. That woman had been so afraid, so convinced that she deserved the betrayal she'd suffered. I wasn't that woman anymore. Around noon, a car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I could see David getting out of his BMW, straightening his expensive suit, preparing for battle. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, David." He looked older than I remembered, harder around the edges. Success hadn't been kind to him. "Mom, we need to talk." "No, we don't." I said everything I needed to say on the phone. I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. "I'm not leaving until you come home with me." I opened the door wider and stepped onto the porch, making it clear I wasn't inviting him in. "This is my home now." He looked around dismissively at the modest neighborhood, the older houses, the working-class cars in the driveways. This? Mom, you're living in some stranger's house like a charity case. I'm living in my son's house as his mother. There's a difference. Your son? David laughed harshly. Mom, I'm your son, not some random guy you used to babysit. You stopped being my son the day you chose money over family. I saw hurt flash across his face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, I'll get a court order. You're clearly not competent to make decisions about your own welfare. I smiled, and it must have been a dangerous smile, because David actually took a step back. David, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. You want to get a court order declaring me incompetent? If that's what it takes. Based on what evidence? That I chose to live somewhere I'm loved instead of somewhere I'm exploited? That I walked away from people who stole from me? That I found happiness after you tried to destroy my life? His face was getting red, the way it used to when he was a child and couldn't get his way. You can't just disappear and pretend we're not family. I didn't disappear. I left. And we stopped being family when you decided I was worth more to you as a bank account than as a mother. A pickup truck pulled into the driveway behind David's BMW. Lucas got out, took one look at the situation, and walked over to stand beside me. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice calm but unmistakably protective. David looked him up and down, taking in the work clothes, the calloused hands, the man who clearly worked for a living instead of stealing from his own mother. You're the one who's poisoned her against her own family, David said. No, Lucas replied evenly. You did that all by yourself. David turned back to me, desperation creeping into his voice. Mom, please. I made mistakes. Vanessa made mistakes. But we can fix this. We can transfer everything back. You can come home. For just a moment, I felt sorry for him. He was so used to manipulating people, to getting his way through guilt and pressure, that he genuinely couldn't understand why it wasn't working anymore. David, I said gently, some things can't be fixed. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. You showed me exactly what kind of person you are, and I believed you. So that's it? You're just going to throw away 38 years of being mother and son? You threw it away. I'm just acknowledging that it's gone. Lucas stepped forward slightly, not threatening, but making it clear he would protect me if necessary. I think you should leave now, he said. David looked between us, seemed to realize that he'd lost this battle, and turned to go. But at his car, he turned back. This isn't over, Mom. You're my family, and I'm not giving up on you. I watched him drive away, feeling nothing but relief. Are you okay? Lucas asked, putting his arm around my shoulders. I'm perfect, I said, and meant it completely. That evening, we sat on the front porch watching the sunset, the way we'd done every evening since I'd moved in. It had become our ritual, our way of marking the end of each day and the beginning of another. Do you ever regret it? Lucas asked suddenly, leaving your old life behind. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret losing my house, my savings, my comfortable retirement? Did I regret cutting ties with my biological son? No, I said finally. I regret that it took me so long to realize where I really belonged. Lucas smiled and took my hand, the same way he used to when he was small and needed reassurance. I love you, Mom, he said, using the name that had come so naturally when he was 7 and had never stopped feeling right. I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. As the stars came out over Maple Street, I realized something wonderful. I hadn't just found my way back to Lucas. I'd found my way back to myself, back to the woman who knew how to fight for what mattered, back to the mother who knew the difference between being needed and being used. Some families are born, others are chosen. The best ones, I'd learned, are built on love instead of obligation, on respect instead of expectation. I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the family I'd chosen. And this time, I was never leaving. The boy I'd never forgotten had saved me right back. Some homecomings are worth waiting 15 years for. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.